Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Maverick Mind. This week I feel like has flown by and also been quite on brand for this week's show. Having the whole whirlwind of, the Bad Bunny Super Bowl last week and how much music can bring people together, how much music and entertainment can really change people's perspectives, how much channeling what you believe in and what you're willing to stand for through what you create can create change. It was such a powerful and amazing thing to watch, especially like living in a Spanish speaking country, everyone being so happy about that. But it's also kind of on brand ish for this week's guest, as this week I'm speaking to a very, very wonderful, very talented musician. This week I'm joined by Alan C. Paul. He is a jazz musician, an author, podcaster, and also a coach whose work lives at this really interesting intersection, which is something that I dabble with a lot myself, and that's the intersection between faith and creativity. One thing that I've learned as a coach for creatives over the last few years is having some kind of faith at the center of your life is really transformative to the journey and genuinely the most anchoring thing that you can have, especially when this path feels deeply uncertain a lot of the time. For Alan, that is Christianity. For me, it's not. For me, it's more of a spiritual practice and different philosophies that at the same time cultivate that same feeling of trust in something that's bigger than myself and this feeling of surrender to what will be, so long as I can keep showing up and doing the best that I can. I think it matters because creativity really demands that feeling of surrender. It asks us to trust our talent before, maybe other people do. It asks us to trust our process and trust what's unfolding around us, even when we can't necessarily see the full picture yet. So that's a really interesting insight into the creative journey that I don't think is really spoken about enough. In this conversation, however, we don't dive that deeply into faith, but it is woven through absolutely everything Alan does. His coaching, his music, how he shows up, and I think that's worth acknowledging right here from the start. What really struck me about this conversation was just how honest Alan was, as always. We go way beyond music. We talk about pressure, purpose, identity, money, what it really, truly means to build a creative life that supports who you actually are, not just what you can produce. We explore the tension between discipline and freedom, why mastering the rules gives you permission to break them properly, and how to measure success on your terms. Alan really opens up about choosing community and his family over, the shiny, constant touring life of a musician, and how he helps other creatives align their work with their values too, and why real confidence as a creative doesn't really have a lot to do with ego. This is a really grounded conversation about all things creativity, calling, purpose, and what it really looks like to keep showing up with integrity when the path isn't always clear and definitely is not always linear. So I'm really excited for you to dive into this episode, and I'm really, really happy to welcome Alan C. Paul to Maverick Mind. Alan, a huge, huge welcome to Maverick Mind. Such an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellie. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, definitely. I think that I'm really excited to dive into your mind because you and I do similar-ish kind of things. So I'd love to see your perspective on a few things. But the first, I kind of want to introduce you to the audience through your artistry, which is jazz music, if I'm correct.
You are. You are. So, yeah, so I always introduce people or introduce myself because this long bio usually that people read and, you don't have to repeat it, but I always start with these four words: husband, father, creative, forgiven, because that kind of fits my whole lifestyle. So husband and father, of course, is my family. But then the creative third one is comes from my music and my writing. And so the music part kind of is where all of it started. It's back when I was 5, 6 years old, whatever. My mom was my first piano teacher. And I started getting into classical music. I was brought up in Northwest Florida, so not like a huge music area, right? It's not like a whole bunch of jazz and blues and stuff happening. We were like 4 hours away from New Orleans. So that's like the closest cultural center, I guess you could say, in the Gulf Coast of Florida. And just grew up playing classical, learning to play in church. So that was like choir music and stuff like that. And didn't really get introduced to jazz until high schoolish. Yeah, around high school. And classical was always like the thing, like, oh my gosh, I have to practice this. I don't really want to practice it, but I have to. And all the other teachers or the students have to practice, so I have to keep up with them. So kind of like pressure, but at the meantime, I was also playing all the songs on the radio, the top 40, the Prince, the Michael Jackson, right? This is the 80s. And so I was learning by ear while I had to do the classical stuff that I had to do, get that out of the way, and then play what I wanted to play, which is learn all the pop music. So that was kind of the bridge into then jazz and improvisational things, which the biggest, I guess, moment for me was I went to a arts camp, which is way up in Michigan in the States. And the classical people were all very kind of like wearing cardigans like this I'm wearing right now. And they were also kind of like busy and running around and playing all this Bach and stuff. And then the jazz guys were hanging out, just kind of relaxing with all these jackets and like, they were like the cool kids of the classes. And they were hanging out on the other side of the camp. And I kept sneaking over from the classical side to get to the jazz side. Because I was like, these guys are boring. I want to hang out with the jazz kids. So that was really like the moment that I was like, okay, maybe jazz is it. So that was my introduction and kind of like my opening. Hearing Miles Davis, I think at 13 or 14 years old, was also another pivotal moment. I was like, what is this music? This strange stuff that doesn't have this form, but it just can flows and they play whatever they want to play. So that was my opening, learning to play by ear. And then eventually it became my best language, I guess you could say, right? I still play all kinds of things, but jazz is the language that best fits my artistic expression, what I want to say, how I can say it. So yeah, college all the way through, I just started playing more and more jazz. And now it's pretty much the yeah, I wouldn't say 80% of the music I play ends up falling into that kind of genre. I hate putting labels, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
that's where it is because I think it's the freedom that it allows. All music allows some freedom, right? Even classical has freedom and
Mm.
creative expression. Doesn't mean it just because it's on a page. But I think jazz, of course, again, has very, very many rules too. People forget that part. But it also gives a lot of freedom. And that's what I enjoy about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of creatives have that aversion to being put in any kind of box of a genre or a niche. Because I think that sometimes as a creator, we often have, you know, the thing that makes us feel like the most us. It really feels like our expression. For me, is fashion design. Used to be,
Mm.
well, I was a fashion designer. And I've done loads of other things, but like nothing really feels exactly the same, even though it all influences each other. And I think it's really good for a creative to kind of have a bit of an ecosystem because you can take influence from, I don't know, I love life drawing. The audience knows that. And then put it into something else. Or you could play Prince and it could influence some kind of jazz beat or something else. So I think that's a really good thing. Something I've always found really interesting about jazz is what you said there is that it's so free. And I can imagine it coming from, again, my life of meditation and yoga and stuff, being really present with the music in that way must be quite a cool journey when you're
It
playing.
is, yeah, no, that's interesting that you say that. And that's why I threw in a little bit of the structure, which people sometimes assume that in music, improvisational music, that structure is like non-existent. Like, oh, just play. And some people would call this free jazz, right? They were in the 60s and 70s. There were these guys that would just jump up and they would have three saxophones in the same mouth, and they would have other guys just like making. And they would feel like it was just utter chaos. And to be straight up with you, I understood what they were trying to say. They were trying to break all the rules. And then every single, you mentioned the discipline, every artistic expression, there's somebody that comes and breaks the rules. That's how music progresses. That's how art progresses. When someone says, I don't like the convention, I don't like the rules, we're going to do something totally different. I'm thinking about from maybe the romantics to the impressionists, right? The impressionists in art started to just do these kind of very ethereal, didn't seem like it really fit the mode of actually having like, oh, this is a plant, right? So it's the same thing in jazz. It kind of moved into where, okay, well, we have this music, but we can start to break rules, but we can make new ones that allow us a new structure with the freedom. And I like the fact that you said labels are kind of like the problem because in the jazz world now, there is a split between the traditional. These are the people that played in the 40s and the 50s and the Louis Armstrongs and all these people. And this is the true jazz. And then there's the people like, no, the people who are playing, hip hop now and smooth jazz. And like you said, these other influences, and the fight over the label disguises the ability for the individual to be creative and just say, hey, this is what I feel. And that's where I'm at, honestly. I'm definitely at that crossroads where like I said, 80s baby. So I have a show coming up where I'll do some Toto references, and we'll do Toto, and we'll do a Phil Collins, and we'll do something else. And we're going to like reinvent these songs because that's our classics. In the 40s, they were reinventing the Broadway shows, right? Hello Dolly and What a Wonderful World. And so a lot of the 40s and 50s and 60s pop music became the jazz standards. Well, they broke the rules. They took what was a 2-minute song and turned it into a 14-minute song, right? And changes all this stuff. So I think the key is, yeah, not letting the labels define you, and artistically realizing that you still have an individual choice to use this again, label, this category, right? Use this category but it's uniquely individual the way you actually express it. The medium just gives you a pathway, and then you mix in, like you said, all these different influences. It's you. It just happens that, if someone asks you, oh, well, what do you play? You have to give them kind of like an answer instead of just, I play music.
Yeah.
It doesn't help them really know what you do. So you have to come up with some kind of labels. But yeah, I think it's uniquely how you mix in your influences, your lifestyle, what you're feeling, what you're doing, and then those individual little pieces of the art form that help you express it. So yeah, I think that's, if you hear my music, you're going to hear a lot more pop maybe than jazz, right? Just because again, that's where I come from. Or more you hear more gospel because that's part of what made me musical. So you're going to hear all those elements, and then when people hear me play, they'll say stuff like that, like, "Oh, you sound like a gospel player." Like, I haven't played gospel in 30 years. Like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? So I don't hear it; they hear it. So it's so interesting that yeah, people can hear the influences even before you do.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think there's an element of I'm just saying this because I found this through fashion. I think at the moment there's a lot of people that can call themselves a designer or like are put into design roles that maybe they haven't learned quite enough yet to really be there. Because in fashion it's I think in a lot of different creative channels as well. I'd see it in painting, and I'm sure it's with the music as well. You kind of have to learn the rules in order to break them effectively. Would you say it's the same?
100%. That is the part that I think a lot of artists struggle with. I was a teacher in elementary school, and then I worked in a lot of tutoring, homeschool, and just worked with a lot of children, right? That was part of my whole upbringing is teaching, which usually involves a lot of boring rules, a lot of boring disciplines, learning the scales, learning all these things. And I was just like, as I mentioned when I was growing up, I didn't like it. Nobody likes those first rudimentary, do what I say, follow the rules, all this kind of stuff. But like you said, the structure allows you to reach the freedom when you understand why did this rule, because again, that rule was by somebody else who probably broke another rule.
True.
Like that rule was invented by somebody who said, I don't like your rule, here's a new one, right? So it's this evolution of understanding by copying the disciplines, by copying the masters, which feels very non-creative, you get the right, like you said, to then break the rules. So I can think of one example for me was one of my most rigid teachers was Mr. Robert Sherwood, rest in peace. He was my high school teacher. And so it's my last kind of like classical teacher that was serious. And when I tell you he was like just so meticulous, like, no, that's not right. There's this phrase is this, write this down. Like so many like conventional thoughts, right? But what I realized, what he gave me the ability to do was really master my technique, so that when I finally found the concerto that I liked, instead of the Beethoven, which I always felt like, oh, this is not really me. Then I found Gershwin. Well, if I had not had the technical facility to do the Gershwin concerto, I would not have played that with the Tampa, Florida. I got to play with the Tampa Bay, Florida Symphony at age 18 when I won this competition because I was going up against all these other students who had way more technically, ability than me, but I had enough and I had the understanding of how to pull off the jazz elements of a Gershwin. But if Mr. Sherwood didn't you know, kind of keep my foot to the fire when it came to the technical, I never would have had that bridge. And that really was my bridge into playing the music I play now. Gershwin was kind of like oh, I can do classical and jazz. It doesn't have to sound, you know what I mean? So
Mm.
I'm thankful for those rules. I'm thankful for that discipline because, again, it allows you to say, hey, if I need to be in an environment, another example was now, someone asked me to play a Broadway show. I got to go back and read all that music. I don't like reading music. It's just tougher, right? It's just I don't get to just play what I want. I have to follow the rules on the page. But it also allows me to be in really cool shows and play music like, coming from Hamilton's and all these other shows that are extremely meticulous, but also give millions of people joy because someone's willing to stick with the rules. And of course,
Yeah.
Hamilton broke the rules when it comes to the actual show, right? So the actual show broke the rules of, hip hop and stuff, but it's all these interesting connections of not being, again, boxed in, but allowing your discipline. I think there's a difference. I think we're hitting on something really cool. Being boxed in and discipline are two different things, right?
Yes.
I think that's what we're saying. Like you can be disciplined and follow the rules to allow you to do the things you want to do. That's not the equal of you can't play anything else. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Or write anything else or design anything else than this. It's like follow the rules so that, like you said, you have the freedom and then realize that um, that's actually the best thing for you is always having a foundation that you can go back to and then rework it from there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's like as you said earlier, it's understanding why things are made in that way, like why you mix paint in that certain way, or in clothes it's like why things are tailored in this really really particular way, because it's only by learning that meticulous craft that then you can question, hey, what if we did this instead, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I think that it's the little changes that make those huge difference over time, right? So it might be just like, oh, what if, and usually it is also the mistakes, right? It's the mistakes
Mm.
from the rule that end up becoming innovation. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, that's cool. But you never would have made a mistake if you didn't have something you were trying to do in the first place. That was
Yeah.
the correct way to do it, right? So it's even like you have to give some, you have to allow the rules to take place just to have a mistake to make. So those where the innovations come from is from those, oh, well, wait, that's not what I meant to do, but that's pretty cool. So let's stay with that. But you have to, like you said, to have a foundation. So I love this conversation because it gives
Yeah.
everybody like kind of like the deep breath, the relax. It's okay. Like you don't have to freak out if you feel like you're stuck in the same old regiment thing because it's actually a bridge to innovation.
Yeah, definitely. I think the second part of that is also allowing yourself to make mistakes. I think sometimes when we're a creative and you're pursuing it as a career and be it taking it quote unquote seriously, I think sometimes, and it's kind of a human thing as well, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves and what we're creating, that the next thing we create has to be, you know, the big thing that
Oh, yes.
gives us safety or gets us
Mm-hmm.
recognized or is, our ticket to the big show. And I think there's a human element of that because we all got very real adult lives where you have bills to pay, etc. But then underneath of it is actually that putting that pressure on yourself and on your creativity
Yeah,
won't
yeah.
allow for innovation to happen because you won't allow yourself to fail or make mistakes.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I deal with a lot of, in my community, a lot of people who are coming from corporate jobs and they're coming from like working with family, and it's like they almost feel like, well, this isn't worth my investment of time into my creative work unless it equally supports what I'm doing on this other side, right? So unless it really is going to become my full-time job, I shouldn't be spending time on it because it's taking away from like, this other thing that I'm doing that again is equally, like you said, paying bills, like it's important. So I heard actually someone talking about this in another podcast about how they didn't want to, and then I'll paraphrase it, they didn't want to monetize the creativity because it felt like it would put pressure on them to have to sell out to
Mm.
whoever they were creating for versus just doing it for fun, right? Because you're doing it for fun and there's no monetary need, then there's no pressure. But he was like, as soon as you say, oh, this is worth this much to this much, and then I want to sell to these people, this audience, this community, now they have demands that you have to meet. And it was kind of like I got it, but it was also like, well, you're basically saying that anytime that you take money for your creative art, that you are somehow less creative or somehow less, you know what I mean? And it felt like that's too far. Like there should be a level of freedom and, like you said, risk. I think the word is risk.
Yeah.
You got to take some risks while you are still producing something that you also, may need to sell.
Yeah.
Like you can't just say, oh well, everybody wants this form, this particular design, this particular type of clothes. Everybody only is doing this dance, so that's all I'm going to sell. This is all I'm going to create. It's like no, like we talked about, innovation is what people are drawn to. Those changes, those moments that like, wow, I never saw anybody do it like that. But and they're willing to then maybe pay you for it. So I talk to a lot of people in our podcast about making sure that they can find that balance. Stay innovative, stay creative, take risks. And yes, it may fail and you may not sell anything and no one may buy it and no one will download it. But the pressure that you just mentioned is something that you have to get to manage because otherwise you do become a shell of an artist. You just because someone like oh, I hate the word industry, right? But industry is about making products. So when anytime you talk about fashion industry, music industry, everything is like, okay, how many products can we push out? And not to, hate on anybody else in manufacturing, but that's it kind of goes anti-art because we create products, but we create products out of a mission or out of a purpose. So if
Mm.
your product doesn't match your purpose, now there's a problem. So that's where I try to like again, I'm doing it the same right now. Like I'm, podcasting and doing music, but it's each one is not my full time. So should I be leaning more into what will sell more so I can do that more? You know what I mean? So I'm dealing with that same kind of struggle with the pressure of what really fits my creative lifestyle.
Before we continue, I want to pause and share something that I built for heart led creatives like you. Ember is the supportive space to ground, to regulate, to reset, and to grow. Inside, you'll learn how to work with your creative energy instead of against it, so you can move through blocks and deeply trust your voice. You can try Ember for free for 7 days. Just head to the link in the show notes to join us, and I cannot wait to see you inside. Now, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, I think it's definitely a dance for everybody. And I think I meet so many people that have that kind of inner duality in their mind of it will either be a conscious or a subconscious feeling of not wanting to be a quote unquote sellout. But then there's a very real thing of, somebody buying something that you've created, like they value it. So it's also placing a
Yeah.
value on yourself as well, which I think is quite a mark of, belief in what you're making and in your talent and in what your voice as well. Yeah, it's a funny thing, but I would say with the pressure or with the pursuit of putting your work out there, and you do that in loads of different ways through, music, podcast, and everything else. What are some things that maybe you do, or maybe you guide people that you work with to kind of ease that pressure? Do you have tools that you use, or is it your faith, or what else?
I think it's definitely a combination of things, both personally and with the people that are in my community that we work with. I would say the first thing is knowing your why, and that can be somewhat cliche, but it also is like impossible to avoid. I have a couple of in my books that I've written for the first one I wrote was for like people like me who play in religious institutions, but also play like outside. So basically, we do both, right? We do faith music, but we also do obviously like everything else in the mainstream. And one of the things, first thing I started with was I spelled out the word service. So the first one is S for stay connected, but then the next one is E for establish your priorities. So establish your priorities means basically, why do you want to do this? So for my example, I've never toured with anyone, like done a major tour and never gone across the stage or done none of that. Like I never been a touring musician. Basically, everything I've done has pretty much been locally right here in my home, South Florida, Miami, Florida. That was a establish a priorities thing because I basically said at that time I had a kid on the way, had another kid, I had a impending marriage, and it was like my brain just cannot absorb the idea of being away from them and being on these tour buses and traveling the world, even though there were opportunities. And so at that point, my values and my decision was like, okay, that means I'm going to have to make it as a musician locally. Like that means decisions have been made.
Yeah.
Decisions have been made on how will I adjust. So now that because I want this is my highest value, my highest priority, now my creative choices have kind of been somewhat made, right? Some of them, not all of them. We're in the internet age. Obviously, we can do music all over the world now, right? But some things were like, okay, well, now I need to get connected to this local network of musicians. Now I need to know how to negotiate with restaurants. Now I need to know if I'm going to do wedding bands. Now I need to know if I'm going to, create music for these jazz festivals here locally. Am I going to create my own festivals, which I did, right? So it was like all of these things were like, oh, now here's my palette of choices creatively based on my values and things that were really important to me. So that was a personal example, right? Where it's like, okay, because I really don't want to do this, I'll have to do more of this, right? And so for others that are in my community, it's been the same thing. How do we figure out what's our why, our highest priority, and then lean into it so that you don't feel like you're losing? It's not like you said no to everything else and suddenly like, success or creative fulfillment is like far away in the distance. It's right here. Yours creative fulfillment is within the things that are already within you.
Mm.
And because they are within you, they are not far off. They are not, oh, if someone just calls me from American Idol, if someone just like, no, your success and your understanding of what, you can accomplish as a creator really come from the innermost parts of you and how you can connect that with another human being, which usually is someone right next to you, someone that like, like even with this connection with podcasting, we said it like just one little, group of people that are like, oh, you are like me. Oh, you do like this music. Oh, you do sing like me. Or you do like this fashion. You do like these paintings. And realizing that it's not so far off. So once you know your why and your priorities, I think it gets easier to say, okay, I'll make some decisions and creative pushes based on what's in front of me. And I know the risks. I know it might take 5 years. I know it might take 3 years. I know people might say no, but at least I know why I'm getting the no's.
Yeah.
It makes you less cut to the heart when people say no, because it's like, well, that's okay because I made the choice to move in this direction, and I'll know I'll get some rejections, but I'm in the right framework, in the right pathway of what really fits with me. And so I think that's one of the main things. If you know your priorities and your why, it then gives you so much more ability to handle the long path.
Yeah. Love that you said that. I think a lot of us in many ways get trapped in that we think that, quote unquote success is touring as a musician or being on a big stage, is, as a designer, having a fashion week show, is it like having a gallery show if you're a painter or an artist. It's like we think it's got to be the pinnacle is only that thing. And then choosing another path is maybe less valid when it's not less valid. It's
Yeah.
especially if it's in alignment with what in your heart you actually feel you want and that you value and that the life that you want to live, then anything that is in alignment with that is a huge success. Choosing yourself and choosing your family or choosing whatever other impacts you want to have is like way more than enough, because I've met so many creatives that have gone the big path and have got to the top of it and they feel wildly unfulfilled some do feel fulfilled because it's in their heart that that's what they do want. But some of them, they just did it because they kind of went with it and then got there and feel there's something missing. But if you're already always checking in with what you value, what you prioritize, and really being strong with that, then I think it can't really lead you far.
100%. And I'm thinking of a quote right now by, famous author C.S. Lewis, who said, "Comparison is the thief of joy."
Mm.
Right? And joy is obviously for creators is just the joy of making things that are beautiful, making things that have an impact. Another, I'm but forgive me because I go into a whole quote machine. But but going back to like the why, like you said, like success being out there versus like your actual goal, and realizing that your goal has to be connected to what you need and what you want, what you desire for your life versus what a whole bunch of other artists or the media or the industry thinks is success. I think of a quote by George Frederick Handel, who wrote The Messiah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Again, right,
Okay,
sings
yeah.
that during the like, big celebrations and things like that. And so George Frederick Handel was finishing that piece. I think famously, like he wrote it in like a fever dream, like an inspiration, like in 24 hours. Like he just wrote this huge oratorio, like done. Some crazy like spiritual like awakening. He was able to do it. And so then he sings it. He produces it, and they perform it. And a prince or some kind of big wig in those days came out to him and said, "Oh, I was so entertained by your performance." And George Frederick Handel said these words that I love as like my why, right? And he said, "My lord, I am so sorry if you were only entertained. I wished to make you better."
Mm.
So that's like a mic drop from the 1600s. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's my goal. I wish to make people better when they hear, see, or, see my writing, read my writing, or hear my music. That's it. And so better doesn't mean the big wig at Sony Music, the person that hears my music from, wherever. Like that's the goal. If you were in my presence and heard what I created and you are better off than before you heard it or read it, job accomplished. Period. And
Yeah.
so again, it might seem simple because yes, I have bills to pay. Yes, I want to sell more records. Yes, I want to, like that's not saying that's not true. It's just at the heart of hearts, that's what fulfills me. You said it, right? So if you know what fulfills you and you're accomplishing it, you have to change your definition of success and constantly remind yourself as a creator, this is what success is. Like I just quote that quote reminds me, if somebody is smiling at the end of a show, no matter how many people showed up, it was a success, period. So yeah, I mean, again, it might seem simplistic, but it's also super important again on the because this is where we're talking about like, you know, that the mindset that gets so messed up in this lifestyle that we do, that it can get so caught up in what other people are doing versus what you really want.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of us, when we're setting out to even sit down and think of what our why is, some people I've noticed get like, again, it's a similar thing of if it's not this like big world changing why, then maybe it's not enough. But I think that simplistic, no pressure why is what is going to create again the best environment for you to keep going, because it is just like, I'm just going to make people feel better, and that's enough, and that's awesome, and that's like such a great um why to have, or like
Yeah.
direction to take yourself, or and I think like it's really cool if you do have a why that is like to save the world in whatever way or stuff like that. I think that is a great thing, but you got to also remember that to save the world, we save one person at a time,
100%.
right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like right that's the key. Like I've seen another person writing about this again about all the issues in the world, and I think I'm going back. I've been reading a lot of C.S. Lewis, so forgive me if he keeps popping up. But he was talking about like, yeah, there have always been crises. There's always been wars. There's always been. It's not to say that to diminish these things, right? There's always been social pressures and things that we want to save the world. Like you said, and our art obviously is a way to motivate people to do better, to be better. I just mentioned it, right? But I can't, like you said, make all the people better at the same time. I can't impact everyone. Every once in a while, there is a "We Are the World." Every once in a while, there is a song that motivates millions to change, right? Here in the States, like We Shall Overcome and the civil rights movement, and the music became a catalyst to a huge mass change in a society. But as you just mentioned, it started with just one person singing to another person or writing a song or writing a book that impacted them. And it can't have worldwide change without having social individual change, right? One to one. And I do, and the internet, again, like you said, we struggle with that because we see so many other people that seem to have this massive impact, and we feel like our impact is lessened because it doesn't equal theirs. My example would be just, simple as the YouTube struggle, the Instagram struggle. Oh, only 5 people like this, and we let that. Meanwhile, they keep changing the rules even on what a view is or you really don't know who saw it. You're just going by these artificial stats that you think the impact is small because somebody put a number in front of you and said, well, this is your impact, right? So we're taking that as our value, in creative spaces so much because we have these big conglomerate companies telling us, well, we value when there's 1 million. So that's your value. You have stakeholders, you have shareholders. That's you. You have to do that. You don't have a choice. Your job is to make money off of all of these creative enterprises and make these people look like, hey, you guys are making $1 billion. Good. Make another billion. They have pressure on the opposite side. Our pressure has to change to versus trying to be like them, to be like the person that says, hey, how do you feel now? Do you like the way this looks? Just to help, just touch you. Those conversations are again, our wins that I was about to send this to my podcast team just today. They were up all night working on a episode that almost, didn't get done in time. So they were rushing. And I felt bad because I'm texting them at midnight. Guys, we need to finish this. And I want to this morning send them the comments that we got from, you know what I mean? Like they need to see that their late night work directly impacted somebody else's mood the next morning when they got that podcast at the right time at like 5 a.m. You know what I mean? Like that's important because otherwise, like you said, we forget and we get so caught up in the metrics that don't really matter.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, especially if you're doing stuff online, like putting things out on Instagram, TikTok, whatever else, or even a podcast, it can feel like no one's listening because you're just out into the ether. And then sometimes, as you said, sometimes you'll post a reel or something and it'll get like 200 views. And 5 likes, and it feels like nothing because you see people getting 1 million views. But if we were on a stage and there was 200 people in front of you, that would be pretty cool, right?
Not just that, just imagine the 200 people like trying to fit into your house, right?
Yeah.
You just have to change the room. If you change the room, you change the view, right? And so if I change the room to, 200 people. And then also think about the time, right? 200 people could have looked at 1 billion different things and chose yours. So even if they watched for 30 seconds, there were so many other people that didn't get their 30 seconds. You were worthy of their 30 seconds, and time is the most valuable resource, right? So we just have to reframe. It's a constant battle. I know this is an internet society, but I'm sure, back in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s and other generations, I'm sure they had the same struggle, right? We hear the stories about the Van Goghs that died penniless, the Picassos and people like that struggle to make a living, that no one recognized their genius. So this is not like a new problem. You know what I mean? We feel like it's a new problem because we're living in it, but it's not a new problem. Like creators have always had to struggle with am I making enough impact? Is my voice actually getting out there? And I think it's just it's a part of the creative dilemma to say, I can still keep going even if I don't see the results right away.
Yeah, definitely. That actually reminded me of something that I heard. I can't remember. It was like either a video or a podcast. It was a podcast, I think. Do you know Olivia Dean?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
The audience are going to get bored of me because I quote things that she says all the time because I love her. But she said that, like, she was like putting out music for 7 years before she really took off, and then took off. It felt like overnight, sometime last summer. And she was saying it's funny now because everyone asks me what's it like to no longer be a struggling artist. And she was like, I'm still a struggling artist. She was just like, might have, money or people know my name, but I'm still struggling with, ideas sometimes, or I'm struggling with logistics within a record label or whatever else, there's still a struggle there. It might just not look the same as it did before, but it's kind of, it's always going to be there. And I think that's also kind of in anything that we do. I mean, if you look back on your career or like maybe how you are now, what are things that maybe help you during like phases where it does really feel like you're trying to, I don't know, push a boulder uphill, or things really do
Mm.
feel like they're in a struggle phase?
Yeah, number one, I love it's a totally different kind of quote. But I'm thinking of I guess Big, Notorious Big, more money, more problems, right?
Yeah,
Like it's
exactly.
the same thing. It's the same thing. Like the problems just change, right? The struggle
Exactly.
changes. It doesn't make it easier. It just makes it different. For me, I would say first thing would be definitely, as we already talked about a lot, the why. But then the second part would be saying, okay, what gives me joy as I'm creating so that, let's say, no one hears it. Well, did it make me happy? Did I do my best work for, to really say that I'm progressing? So to change the metric from, oh, what did other people think to what did I think? And I'm thinking of this. I wrote this in one of my little books. By the way, I'll do a shameless plug because it's free. It's on Amazon. It's called Breakthrough the Block: 5 Ways to Renew Your Creative Inspiration. And so it's basically
Wow.
like a tiny, tiny little ebook. Like it takes like 10 seconds to read. It's basically a blog post that I turned
Wow. And
into a
it's
book.
free.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's free on Amazon. So what the thing I tell in that book, and the reason why it came to mind is because I mentioned a children's book that I've never forgotten. When your parents read to you, right, it gets core memory. So it was called Slugger Sal's Slump, and it was
Hard to
about a
say.
baseball player who's like supposedly hitting the ball home runs all the time, but then he goes into a slump and strikes out over and over again. And his mother comes to him and says, oh, you got to get your chin up. He's like, no, I'm a washed up player. And she changes his what if I never hit the ball again. And she says, so what if? And then the book just goes on with the so what if you can't play? You can do this. And it's again, it's a reframing, it's a cute story, but it's stuck in my head, right? I'm 51 years old and I still remember this children's book, you know. So I change it to the what ifs, because that's what gets into your mind. What if nobody watches? No one I can never get another post. What if no one ever watches my podcast, listens to my music, buys my book? And you change it to the so what if? So what if they don't? Have you lost the ability to write? Personally, so what if? Do I still enjoy playing 3 o'clock in the morning, keeping my wife awake with all these crazy chord ideas? Yes. So that pressure that we talked about earlier is relieved when it's like, this is still a joy for me. And when I realize that I am still kind of like operating in that gift, for me personally, obviously, it's very much a spiritual, religious gift that I give to my church every week. I realized that that's something that I was born to do, made to do. And it's like, well, I am operating in the most present form of myself and the best form of myself that I can when I'm doing this.
Mm.
So, so for me to realize that I am being getting fulfilled in that purpose, in that thing, whether or not anybody ever hears it, because there's been so many songs I've written that no one has ever heard. But that doesn't make them any less worthy, right? There's again all these sketches that I've done, things like that, in terms of like book ideas. They're sitting on my computer right now. They may never be read. Me again, personally talking about my faith, I have a belief that all good work is eternal. So I will have eternity, again, depending on anybody's faith journey. I believe I'll be a creative for the rest of eternity. So no rush. These
Mm.
ideas, if they are good, if they are worthy, if they are what a certain scripture says, good, excellent, worthy of good report, right? And it's like these things will last. And so I just have this feeling that, okay, maybe I didn't get to that idea, that song idea, and no one heard it. But technically, it's not over yet. So
Yeah.
that helps me, right? That helps me to not get so caught up in what something happened today that somebody watched and listened and gave me money and but right? Like, because that's the like the hamster wheel that we can get on. And
Yeah.
going back to again, almost a little selfish. I heard Rick Rubin say this. I don't know if I don't know if you heard Rick Rubin, the record
Love Rick
producer.
Rubin. I have his book just
There you
there.
go. Yeah, I figured. So I heard him say this on a reel, and I almost did it for like a discussion because it sounded weird, but he's Rick Rubin, right? And
Yeah.
he said, my art is selfish. I write for me first. I create for me. It was like it was on this Instagram reel or a Facebook reel. He's like, I write for me first. If I like it, this is for me. And then if you guys like it, it's the audience is second, right? And it was just like a revolutionary. It was like, oh my gosh, he said it like the audience is second. It's like, yeah, at some point you have to reverse it to where am I happy with who I am and what I'm creating? And that has to be the starting point. And then if you create from a place of authenticity and other people come along, that's like icing on the cake. And again, I know that it sounds, every time I say stuff like this, it sounds like it's simplifying and making it like, ooh, woo, woo. And it's like, no, it's not that easy. I get it. It's not that easy. But it is where it's like you have to come back to.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, a mindset you have to come back to. I say something quite similar to the Rick Rubin. I think it's more about when people are maybe a bit holding back from sharing their work because it feels really vulnerable. Like sometimes our work feels like we're walking around naked or something.
Hmm.
But when you create for yourself and then once it's finished, it's no longer yours. Now it's for them. It goes on to have its own life. So you create for yourself, but you share for them. But
Yeah, like, yeah. I
whoever
think you
needs
said it
to,
better. Yeah.
yeah, whoever needs to hear, feel seen by you through whatever you've created and help them, like you said, feel better in whatever way. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. But I think also what you said is really key. And like whatever your belief, I think it's a realization that I think once you feel it, you can't really ignore it. Is that when you have that pulling feeling of I must do this, I must create, like I can't feel like myself if I'm not doing that. That's for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that now, and this is another really deep topic that I don't know if I want to go into, but the whole identity. Who are you
Mm,
when you're not creating? I've struggled with that. I have gone to opposite extreme, right? Where it's like if I'm not creating, I don't feel like myself. And it's like, no, that's why I start my bio every time with husband, father, right? And
mm.
then I say creative because thank God my kids still love me and my wife has put up with me, right? And those two parts of my identity will always come before the creative side, right? And so if I don't remember that, again, going back to the why, I want to be the best person I can be for them. And this just helps me do that. It helps me be a better husband when I'm happier and comfortable in my creative work. It helps me be a better father, helps me be a better friend. You know what I mean? But if it keeps me from being a better friend and better human being, then I need to put that down and just stop playing. Like anytime it starts to detract from my ability to be like an authentic, good human being, now we got a problem. Now the creativity is getting in the way because I'm idolized it and I've made it like this big albatross or wall that I have to scale it before I can even think about you. That's the wrong selfish part, right? That's the selfish that's really selfish.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the fact that you can talk about like, yeah, the identity does come from feeling that fulfillment of creative work, but it can't replace it. It cannot
Mm.
replace your identity, right? It's and, right? It's I, yes, and, right? Yes, I'm a creative and I'm a person that exists outside. I have other interests and other goals. Creativity is a huge part of it, but not the entire part, right? There's something at the core that's much deeper than that. And this just helps me express who I am, but it doesn't define who I am.
Yeah, I think that's really important that you said that. And I've definitely fallen into that trap as well. I used to own a fashion label that did really well. You know, it was in like Vogue and Tatler. And I've really, I think, tied up myself within the brand. It was quite like my face everywhere as well. So it really did feel like an extension of myself. But when I had to close that during COVID, um, and also COVID happened as well. So I couldn't teach yoga. I wasn't doing anything else. I was like, well, Jesus, like, what now?
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, I think that definitely like it's part of you, but it's not all of who you are. Because I think also when you separate that, what you create has there's more likeness again to what you're creating that we were talking about the pressure earlier. And it's more authentic,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely. Yeah. And I love the fact that you told that story about having to let something go, right? Like that is honestly kind of like where we do decide it's different than the Rick Rubin thing of letting the go of the individual art. It's much harder when you're letting go of like an entire baby. Like this is the baby you brought up and you created the brand and you created the project. And it's like, okay, now this whole season of my life that I've dedicated to is and like you said, like the now what? And I had this experience kind of in a way, walking away from, like I said, it was, wherever kind of faith you are or believing or not believing, changing from a whole nother job and like walking away from it is hard. And so that's what
Yeah.
I did when I walked away from my church ministry position, literally gave my current, that time, my boss, my pastor, a resignation letter while he was giving me my promotion letter. And I'm like, nope, I already feel that this season is closing and it's time for me. So I walked away with no job, forget, artistic, no job. I walked into my wife and said, hey, honey, I just quit my job. You know what I mean? It's like, who am I now? I based my entire life on serving this community and being this person, and now it's gone. And I basically gave it away. No one told me to give it away. I gave away this part of my identity, which was totally based on what I do creatively in this space. It's gone. Who am I? To be long story short, so I won't keep bore your audience, got in gigs, 8, 9, 10 years later, became that next thing. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't have happened had, I don't know what happened after you let go of your company, but I know after my company, there was this huge pivot to what I'm talking about right now with you, right? Being able to be an author, podcaster. None of that comes before I gave up that whole other identity, which was, again, wholly put on my creative work, like music ministry, playing, singing, directing, audio. Like I had to do all of that, right? I was basically like the creative director in a sense.
Mm.
And I walked away from all of it because I just, again, spiritually speaking, I knew there was another season. I had no idea what it was. And it felt like insanity to walk away from it all. So that's where I can definitely say to everyone that's listening, if you are considering a big change or feeling like you said that pressure, there is something on the other side. You don't know what it is. And I'm not saying like walk away from your job like I did, but be aware that there's probably more capacity in you than you're giving yourself credit for. There's more creative capacity, there is more emotional capacity, but you don't find out until you make that step of faith. And so sometimes it takes walking away and letting go, and that's the hard part. So hope that
Yeah,
helps
it
somebody.
is definitely the hard part. And yeah, I'd say my journey was similar. Closing that company, there was like a really messy time where I just felt like I was walking through mud or something, not really
Mm.
knowing where I was going to go. And then from that came this. So it's kind of a similar thing. I guess definitely, yeah. But I think that that's a great thing to leave people with, especially if you are in that space. But as we come towards the end, I always finish with two questions that I ask everybody. The first one is, what do you think is the most common misconception, either about you or about the work you do? Or it could be both.
Most common misconception. This is a good one. The Probably the one that may have heard from, I'd say, outside creative, because there's some inside and outside, right? So I think the one outside is that, and I hate to say it because it's usually the one that, I would like to think is changing, but that this isn't a real job.
Mm.
It's almost the way they come to you, and you know this, I'm sure you've seen this, when people come to you and they're like, so how's that thing going?
That little
You know,
project.
right, that little, right. Like it's just the way, and I know they're not trying to do it on purpose, but it is still this kind of, and again, we're in 2026 as we're recording, and the idea that we don't understand what a content creator slash, you know, whatever creator artist is a viable option, and actually it does mean work, it still has this kind of almost like Wizard of Oz curtain that people
Mm.
kind of assume that there's no way that I can know it's my this that's a strange world over there. And it's the same as everyone else's. I get up, I have hours, I have office hours. I'm in my office right now as I'm recording you. I have appointments, I have taxes to like,
Yeah.
like it's not that, and it's crazy because again, we're talking to creators, and yet it's not that different from everybody else's job.
Yeah.
And that's the part where I almost feels like we should demystify it a little bit. Maybe sometimes we artists get a little too, hey, we're just a special tribe. It's like, no, we're putting our pants on like everybody else and paying bills like everybody else. And it's really not that different. So I would say that's the biggest misconception I've faced outside of the creative space. It's just that there's something so different about what I do. It's so magical because I'm a musician. It's like, no, it's kind of like accounting. It may seem different, but it's kind of like I said, I heard somebody say this, like, the best artists are those who treat their lives like accountants because they get up, they do the thing, they go back to bed, they get up, they do the thing, and they
Yeah.
take the mystery out of it so that you come up with creative stuff. It's beautiful. I'm not dismissing it, but sometimes I think people think that it's so different, and it's like, oh
Yeah.
no, it's a lot of drudgery too.
Yeah, definitely. I think I say this a lot because I think a lot of us, we have this subconscious belief that we don't have a real job as well, especially if you're not giving yourself structure like that. Um, but that's because I think in years past, in like Picasso's age or something, he was a great businessman. But in that time, it felt like, if you're an artist, then you're only going to make money after you die. Before that,
Hmm.
like you're not. And that was true maybe at the time, but now we have the internet and it's like a million times easier to make money as a creative now than it ever has been. So it's like definitely it takes effort, but it is a real job for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. The second question that I ask everyone is if you think back to a really memorable conversation that you've had in your life, who were you talking to and what did they say that you remember has kind of stuck with you for this long?
Oh wow. Um, these are such good questions, and there's so many choices I could pick, right? Um, okay, I'll try to stay. I'll got a little teary-eyed because I'm thinking all the different like moments, like
Oh,
someone said something. I was like, oh my gosh, that's where I got married, and that's what that. So, but I'll actually this is not necessarily a conversation. It's something that my father wrote to me, kind of like as a like final, and he's still here by the way, but like it was my graduation. So he gave me this book and it was the little life's little instruction book. I don't know if you ever seen these little books like are in the stores and it has all these little pithy sayings. And what my father did at my graduation was he added his own little instructions inside the book. So he added these little like, comments and like he did, 465.1. So he would add his little things in, right? And so this touches me because this is something I've had to remember because my father's not a creative. My father is a dentist. He's been working in the medical field for, his entire life. And so he sings and he appreciates music and he introduced me to songwriters like James Taylor and Paul Simon and Earth, Wind and Fire. His record collection is basically what kind of became a soundtrack of my life, right? So he directly influenced my creative space, even though he was never a musician, right? And so the thing that also my dad's a few words, so he probably wouldn't have these long conversations with me. So this is how he was having this conversation. So the last phrase inside his life skills instruction book that I read, I think it was 501 and a half. And it was smile when you miss a note. There's always another one coming.
Love that.
And when you are beating yourself up over the last mistake you made, and he used to see me, I would get so mad. Oh my gosh. And I was just like, again, the identity, right? I thought I was a failure because I messed up and the audition didn't go right. And people would see me viscerally like crumple when I made a mistake. And he was just giving me that grace, that permission to say, "Hey, relax. You're accepted. You're loved. You don't have to take it so hard when something doesn't go right on the stage or on your piano." And again, like the reason this touches me and the reason I remember this is because as a non-creative, he gave me that freedom, and I've never forgotten that little phrase: "Smile when you miss a note. There's always another one coming." So
Ah.
yeah, that would be the phrase and the conversation that that has meant them a lot over my life.
Yeah, that's such an awesome gift idea and a really nice kind of also like gift of a phrase to give you as well at that time to carry you through. Oh, I love that so much. Alan, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute joy to have you here. As always, I'll be leaving the links to find you in the show notes. But in case everybody's poised and ready right now, where is the best place that they can go to first to find everything that you do?
Well, number one, you need to make sure you are following this podcast if you're listening or watching. Please, this is our tribe. This is where you find inspiration. We don't get to have conversations like this all the time, So this is why, I was looking forward to this so much. So please follow this podcast. After you follow this podcast, then you can either go to God and Gigs. That is my faith-based podcast for musicians, artists, creatives who are trying to become the creators that they were created to be. So that's anywhere you find God and Gigs. If you're interested in that, that's kind of like where I share with my tribe. If you're just looking for my music and my art, honestly, I've been horrible at promoting it. I forget that I'm also a musician and a creative, so and an artist myself. So I have been trying to get better at that. You can find most of that at alancpaul.com. And that will show you my music, my, like all the stuff. So all the other things I do, I try. But again, I'm really raising my hand. I am not taking my own medicine in terms of promoting myself. It's like, oh, that's right. I have to tell people I have shows and I play music all the time. So yeah, but you can find most of that at alancpaul.com. And I promise if I have new shows and new music, I will be posting it there.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll leave those links below, everyone, so you can click and go and find them right away. But otherwise, thanks again so much for coming on the show. Everyone listening, share it with a friend or share it on social media. If you do, then do tag us and let us know which part of this conversation resonated with you most. I always love to hear that. But otherwise, thank you again, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Maverick Mind. I hope that you've loved it, and if you have, I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe and write a 5-star review on wherever you're listening to this podcast from. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I invite you to join me over on Instagram at maverickmindco or on my website maverickmind.elliefoden.com. And I'll see you in another podcast very, very soon.